My name is Mark Harris. I'm a doctor of naturopathic medicine in Bozeman, Montana. The presentation today is the 5 factors of weight loss. Everything that is necessary to maintain your weight, lose weight, or gain weight, and all the things that can affect those 5 factors. Now, in beginning this presentation, we're going to talk about how weight loss has been suggested for a long time. And the first statement we'll make is one of the most complicated statements during the whole process, but don't panic or flee. It will get much simpler after this. The first law of thermodynamics states that energy cannot be created or destroyed, but can merely change form. Well, this is a very useful analogy if you are a car. You put gas in the car, you have a certain engine size, you drive. That energy is converted into moving the car. But this is not as good in a biological system, meaning us, human beings, because the data shows that energy in is not all the same, and energy out is not all the same, and there are, for us, what we're calling 5 factors to determine that. So, by the end of this presentation, you should have everything you need to be able to understand all those 5 factors. Now, the first thing we look at is the type of food you eat, or what we'll call the type of fuel you eat, using that car analogy, but we'll call it food. Now, if we eat refined carbohydrates, anything made from flour, from breads, pasta, bakery goods, things made from sugar, and worth noting here, in certain items that are labeled natural or in the health food section of the store, it will list an ingredient called evaporated cane juice. It's a synonym for sugar. And then anything that contains high fructose corn syrup, white rice, bananas, white potatoes, or what we call the white foods. Because when we eat these foods, this is what happens. As we even smell them, our pancreas will produce insulin, and then we will take those foods from our intestine, we'll store some of that sugar in our liver, so that we have a couple hours worth of it available to us to do things, and anything beyond a small amount is then converted to LDL cholesterol, the so-called bad cholesterol, and triglycerides. Then these are stored as fat. Now, this is not necessarily a bad thing because fat is a longer-term storage, whereas glycogen in our liver is a short-term storage of energy. So as long as we can utilize that fat, we have energy abundantly in our day-to-day life. But when we can't utilize it, then it stores and grows, and we don't have that energy available to us. Now we're going to see a difference in foods. In the next slide, we have the different fuel type, which we'll call another kind of food, unrefined carbohydrates. These would be vegetables. Whole grain, so white rice is not a whole grain, but brown rice is. Then quinoa, amaranth, and foods like that. Healthy beans, nuts, fish, chicken, beef and game, and healthy fats. And we'll be defining what healthy is as we go along. Now, we eat these foods, the beans, the healthy nuts, chicken, etc., and we can have the same number of calories we had with the type 1 foods. Those foods that we called rapidly converting to blood sugar. So even eating the same amount of calories, so calories in, these are going to be processed differently. Our liver will manufacture IGF-1, otherwise known as insulin-like growth factor 1. Then we'll take those calories and send them to our muscles and to our other cells in our body. Now in our muscles, it goes to our muscle cells. And looking at the cell presented here, we see little half cutaways of kidney bean shaped items. Those are called mitochondria, but let's think of those as the engines of our cells. And it's worth noting here about IGF-1. Now, IGF-1 is in the literature as being higher when we have cancer. Well, this is not really the cause of the cancer, but in fact, as we have more blood sugar building up in our system, we make more IGF-1 to counteract the blood sugar, but the blood sugar is really the problem. So IGF-1 is really just the indicator that the blood sugar problem is there. So now we've seen two different types of foods, the high blood sugar type foods, the low blood sugar type foods, even with the same number of calories, can either be utilized or burned as fat. So now calories in from the first law of thermodynamics no longer holds true because the data just doesn't support it in a biological system. Now, we've seen, depending on the type of food we eat, our liver will determine if that is burned or stored. And we have help in burning or storing these things. And then as we start looking at this factor, we see these are also things that not only will determine if our liver takes these calories for storage or burns them, but will also determine, once we have stored it as fat, if we can burn it as energy. So the first factor we'll talk about is the hypothalamus and pituitary glands that sit up in your head, in your brain, and these are called your master glands. Well, from these we produce human growth hormone, or HGH, and this will be necessary for our liver to be able to produce IGF-1 to take those calories, the calories in, and utilize them rather than store them. Now, HGH is produced in the greatest amounts to about age 17 plus or minus 1 or 2 years. And this is what helps us achieve our height as an adult. And then it drops off. But if it drops off too much, then rather than growing vertically as we do when we're younger, then as we get beyond our adult height, if we don't have enough HGH, then we grow horizontally, or we start to gain weight. Now we have additional factors that help our liver to utilize calories and also help our fat to burn calories rather than just store it. So the next factor is our adrenal glands. These sit on top of our kidneys, little triangular shaped glands from which we produce DHEA, another signal crucial for the liver's ability to make IGF-1, and as we've talked about, we need this to burn an equal number of calories versus store the calories. And the adrenal glands are affected by various other things and make other hormones. And again, the adrenal glands, once we've stored a calorie as fat, also helps us burn that calorie. Now we look now at the thyroid gland. The thyroid does not have a direct effect on the production of IGF-1, but has an indirect effect. But in turn, it must be prompted by the adrenal glands. At that point, the thyroid will then talk to the hypothalamus and pituitary up in your brain and help it to make HGH, human growth hormone. And then as the hormones are also balanced, not only do we make IGF-1, but we begin to burn the calories stored as fat rather than keeping them stored. Now we also have another hormone that can affect this, being estrogen. Now estrogen will be produced all throughout life up until menopause, and then throughout the production of estrogen, it helps our hypothalamus to make human growth hormone. But we have a problem though, because if estrogen is not properly managed and balanced, then it will tell your liver to not make IGF-1. So in essence, estrogen, if it's not regulated properly, will be earplugs for your liver, so it's not listening to your hypothalamus or your adrenal glands to make IGF-1. Now putting this together, what we have determining our calories in and our calories out. Calories in are by and large determined by the food we eat and how our liver takes them in. So equal calories of food will either be stored or burned depending upon our liver and the things that affect it. Then once we have stored fat, the ability to burn it are also largely determined by the same factors, the health of our hormones and the foods that we have eaten. So now we have our hypothalamus, our thyroid, our adrenal glands, our pancreas, estrogen, and the food we eat determining whether we burn or store a calorie. And we can have equal numbers of calories of the type 1 versus the type 2 foods, even though they're the same calories in, they'll get stored or burned at different rates. Now, we talked about estrogen can do earmuffs to your liver so it's not listening to all the signals it needs. So when your liver is under stress, and the various stresses to your liver can be prescription drugs, the type 1 foods we talked about being the rapid blood sugar foods, caffeine can stress your liver and basically cause it to not listen. So coffee, chocolate, all the foods we're addicted to. Acetaminophen, also by a brand name known as Tylenol, can tell your liver that it shouldn't listen to your hormones, stress out your liver. Alcohol can do this in more than just a moderate amount, and stress in your life can do this also. So when we have these or combinations of these things in our life, it's in essence that our liver is not listening to all of our hormones and the food types we are eating. So now we can do everything right, but if our liver is being stressed by these factors, our liver is going to preferentially take calories, even the type 2 calories, and store them as fat. Now we also talk about stresses to the other hormones in our body. Our hypothalamus, our adrenals, our ovaries, testes, pancreas. So physical or emotional stress can affect these. Chemical toxins in our environment and our food can affect this, as can heavy metals, fluoride, copper, hormone replacement therapy, HRT, drugs like Premarin, and the patches that are used. SSRIs are the drugs like Effexor and Prozac. We can have physical trauma that can affect things. We can have type 1 fuels as the primary foods in our diet. So now we'll look in a little more detail as to which things affect which systems. So the thyroid gland we'll talk about first. And thyroid hormone is made from iodine. So if we have low iodine, meaning we're not getting in our diet, then we won't be able to make adequate thyroid hormone. And the major sources of iodine are seaweed and shellfish. And if you're not eating those, then you're probably low on iodine. Iodized salt doesn't provide enough iodine unless you're eating a prodigious amount of salt, and if you are, then salt's going to be a further problem in your health. Now, chemical toxins in our air and our food will deposit in the thyroid gland and affect its production of hormones. Then in our thyroid gland, we make T4, which is 4 iodines, and that is less active than 3 iodines, or T3. And after the hormone leaves our thyroid gland, it is converted from T4 to T3. And 2 of the factors that are necessary for conversion are sulfur and selenium. So if we're low on those minerals, we won't convert T4 very well. If you're low on iron, if you have a heavy menstrual cycle, or you don't have a lot of iron-containing foods or poor absorption of iron, then the signal from your hypothalamus to your thyroid gland is inhibited, and your thyroid gland is not told to make T4. And then fluoride. Major sources of fluoride are toothpaste and water. Now, fluoride and iodine are in the same class of chemicals on the periodic table of the elements. And I'm sure probably even before you watching this today, you were looking over the periodic table of the elements just for the pure joy everyone gets from that. Well, even if you haven't done that, these 2 elements, fluoride and iodine, are in the halogen group of chemicals. But what this boils down to is, when you have fluoride in your system, it displaces iodine from your thyroid hormone and inactivates the hormone. But this will still show normal on a laboratory test, but will have no activity in your body. Now, the next area that can be affected, the hypothalamus, this can be from a whack on the head. Chemicals and fluoride will affect this also, as will having been pregnant, being menopausal, but actually, let's just add a little bit of ridiculous to our conversation today. Menopause has been a term we've used for a long time, and then it's been realized that men also change the hormones between the mid-40s and the mid-50s. So first this was called male menopause. Well, men didn't like this term at all. And I really don't understand why, because both the word male and men was in the term. Well, now they're using a more updated term called somatopause. So now no one will know what it means. But it really means age-related hormone decline. And that's where age comes into our hypothalamus gland as well. But there are ways to optimize that and also removing the stresses from that. Now, the next area we look at is estrogen metabolism. Now, if your thyroid is low, which we talked about, those factors, then your estrogen will be high, and that will give a bigger signal to your liver to take calories and store them. If you're taking SSRI drugs, specific serotonin reuptake inhibitors, things like Prozac or Effexor or Celexa, these will ultimately change your estrogen metabolism, and this is why so many people gain weight on those drugs. You can have hormone mimics. These can be some soy foods. These can be foods stored and microwaved in plastic containers. This can be byproduct from the manufacture of plastics. If you're taking hormone replacement therapy, notably drugs like Premarin, and if you are in somatopause, this can affect your estrogen metabolism, which will then affect your ability to burn fat once it's stored, and your ability to either, through your liver, store fat or use it directly in your cells. Now, your pancreas is where you will make insulin, which will tell your body to store calories. Now, insulin is not a bad guy. We just need the proper amount of it. Now, your pancreas can be affected by your immune system, and then that will result in diabetes. And then your pancreas will also make excess of insulin if you're eating the type 1 foods. Now, these are the refined carbohydrate foods and the white foods that rapidly respond to blood sugar. Now, your adrenal glands are affected by stress in your life. This can be physical or emotional. If you take the drug prednisone, this will deplete your adrenal glands. If you eat sugar, so you see sugar affects the liver and the pancreas, so it tells your body store those calories rather than burn them. And then sugar also affects your adrenal glands, so it affects the entire metabolism system. And then caffeine will also deplete your adrenal glands, so coffee, chocolate. Now, how it works in the adrenal glands, when the adrenal glands have stress, and really our adrenal glands were designed for short-term stress. So we got this poor guy running from this other guy. So when he sees that, he gets that kind of expression, and then that stuff we call glycogen, which is stored in the liver, is released. And then we also convert protein to sugar. So where does that protein come from? Well, it can be from our diet, it can be from our muscles also. But we need blood sugar, so it increases, it goes to our muscles, and we run, which is what you have to do when you're being chased by a bear or a tiger. And that stress is over in 20 or 30 seconds. Now, that stress can recur, but often in this scenario, maybe once or twice a year. So this is adaptive and beneficial. But life now is different. Our stress is more on an emotional level, and this can be stress from not enough time, or relationship stress, or money stress, or health stress, or watching the news. Now we have a similar thing that will happen under emotional stresses. We'll release sugar from our liver, we'll convert protein into sugar, but now our muscles are not needed. Our blood sugar rises, but our muscle doesn't use it. So our pancreas produces insulin, and then it goes to our liver, converted to LDL cholesterol and triglycerides, and it's stored as fat. And then as stress continues, we keep storing fat, and we keep burning muscles into sugar. So it becomes a vicious circle of events. So as we gain weight, we actually lose muscle. But this is the basis for books and supplements that say it's all about cortisol. It's not all about cortisol. It is one of the factors, and only one of the factors in the hormone system. Now, the thyroid we talked about helping the hypothalamus to make HGH. But it also works in a different way. Now, if we look down to our cells, and you once again see these little kidney bean shaped things down there called the mitochondria or the cellular engines, our thyroid gland works very much directly in this part of our body, in our cellular membranes and our mitochondria. Now the membrane, as you see, an envelope around the cell and the blue area enfolded in the center of the cell, and then you see a pink area enfolded in front of the blue area. So these are made up of fats, cholesterol, and have an electrical charge. And these are also under direct stimulation of active thyroid hormone, which we call T3. And remember, if we're not getting various nutritional elements, we have a hard time making T3. And if we have fluoride, it inactivates T3. So then the thyroid becomes crucial to making energy in the cells, and this can be up to 50% of the energy we make on a daily basis. Now, worth noting here also is the cellular membrane, which we said is made up of fat, cholesterol, and protein, and under electrical influence from hormones. But the fats we eat can determine the structure and will determine the structure of these membranes. So when we have the essential fats, which are called the omega-3s and the omega-6s, this will create the proper electrical environment and flexibility in our cells to take in energy and nutrients and remove waste products. Now, if we eat trans fats, or what are also called partially hydrogenated oils or fried foods, then these fats will also make their way into our cellular membranes. These will affect the electrical activity and the flexibility, so will not allow in nutrients, and then that slows down our mitochondria, our cellular engines, and we can't make energy. So good news is when we stop eating those foods, about within 3 months, our cells renew and all our membranes revert back to the optimal form for burning a calorie. Now, of note of partially hydrogenated oils. In food manufacturing, you only have to list these on the label if they are above a certain amount. So in a lot of packaged foods, what manufacturers have done is taken what used to be 1 serving and now say it's 4 servings, because the smaller serving doesn't have the amount of trans fats that would have to be listed on the label. So one little trick here is look on the label for the total fats, and then look at the polyunsaturates and the monounsaturates. If those numbers don't add up to the total, the rest of it is partially hydrogenated oil or trans fats. Now, the hypothalamus gland and the hormones and the type of foods we eat and our liver health are what we've called the first 3 factors. But what I'd like you to recognize here, that if all this gets balanced, not just are we going to achieve our ideal weight, but every system in our body is going to be better health. We're going to have more energy, more clarity of thought, more emotional balance. So the 5 factors of weight gain and weight loss are not just the 5 factors of that, but they're largely going to determine our overall health. Now let's simplify this for the first 3 factors. We've talked about all the things that can affect them, but what we have first off is the type of food you eat. Refined carbohydrates, calories in, will tell your liver to store it as fat. You eat the other type of food we suggested, and you can have the same number of calories, and your body will utilize this as energy. How good is your liver doing? Because even if you're eating the right type of foods, if your liver is not getting the right signals, it will preferentially store calories rather than burn them. and then your hormone balance. Your hormone balance affects your liver, and once you've stored fat, which is an ideal source of storing energy, your hormone balance determines if you can utilize that and burn it as energy, meaning burn up fat so you have less of it and have more energy. All right, so now we get into factor number 4. How well are you digesting and assimilating your food? So digestion is the breakdown of food. Assimilation, once you've broken it down, is taking food into your system to be utilized. Now, the breakdown of food, first we chew food. And most people chew it twice and swallow it, and don't follow the advice of our grandparents and parents, is to chew thoroughly. Now, why this is important, this begins the mechanical breakdown of food, meaning grinding it up in your teeth, and gives the enzymes in saliva a chance to begin breaking down food. And then we have various secretions as food travels down our esophagus into our stomach and beyond. We have various secretions necessary for the breakdown of food. Hydrochloric acid in our stomach, enzymes from our pancreas, secretions from our pancreas. And why we have secretions, well, the enzymes in our pancreas are not active. If they were, they'd digest our pancreas. So we squirt them out to our small intestine in a non-active form, then we dump out secretions to activate them. But if the hydrochloric acid is not adequate in the upper step, then the stuff we squirt out is too alkaline and the enzymes don't get activated, and then we don't properly break down food. We make bile in our liver. We make enzymes in our small intestines, and then we have a valve between our large and small intestine called the ileocecal valve, and we'll talk more about that very shortly. Now, if we look at this top of this picture on the larger part where we see liquid in the stomach, the liquid is a mixture of fluids and mostly hydrochloric acid. And on a good day, we make 2 quarts of that stuff. Then highest up you see a label that says the lower esophageal sphincter. Well, that is a muscular valve. When we make hydrochloric acid, it hits that valve and closes it down tight. So most people don't make enough hydrochloric acid. So this can become a problem, and we'll talk about that more in the next slide. But 2 quarts of hydrochloric acid, we don't make that because it's bad for us. We make it because it's so necessary. Now, in our liver, we make bile. And then you see a green pear-shaped thing. That's your bile duct. So as we eat fats, bile is stored in the liver, and then bile is released into the small intestine to break down the fats and help absorb them. And this, we can't distinguish between a good fat or a bad fat. So what we call the essential fats versus the fried foods and the trans fats, your body can't tell the difference. But those fats are absorbed somewhat different than a lot of the other calories. These are packaged and absorbed through your lymphatic system, so these don't even see your liver initially. So eating fats doesn't really make you fat, but it can through how it affects your cellular membranes. Now, in our small intestine, we make enzymes. And this is where most of our digestion, meaning the breakdown, takes place, and also the absorption of foods. So we break down carbohydrates and proteins with these enzymes, and this is also part of the digestive system. Now, assimilation, once we've broken down food, is we want to absorb it. We have a mucus layer in our gut. We have intestinal bacteria. We have an ileocecal valve, which we called earlier the valve between your large and small intestine. And then we have gap junctions. Think of these as a fine filter. We absorb food 2 ways. We take it in through the microscopic projections on our intestines, or we take it in through fine filters in the intestinal basement. Now, the mucosa is a 1 millimeter thick layer and crucial. And this is where we house our enzymes and our intestinal bacteria, which determine largely how we break down and absorb food. So a healthy intestinal mucosal layer is going to be paramount to everything else we need to do in our intestine to break down and absorb foods. Now, our intestinal bacteria, we have several kinds, and the small intestine bacteria and the large intestine bacteria are not the same kind. Then we have what are called transient bacteria. Those bacteria that we consume in our food or get in nutritional supplements that do not stay in our gut. They're helpful while they are there, but they pass through. And these are by and large yogurt-type bacteria and most probiotics that are in health food stores. Then we have the colonizing bacteria. These are the bacteria that when we consume them, they actually colonize the walls, and then all the other bacteria of the 500 or known species that live in our gut can live there and do what they are supposed to do. So if we take probiotics and they are not helping us, it might be because of the wrong type. It might be because our mucosal layer is off and we have no place for those bacteria to live. Now, as we look at the absorption and eliminative parts of our intestine, we talked about different bacteria living in the large and small intestine. And then right between them in the lower left part, right by the little worm-like structure that is your appendix, we have the ileocecal valve, the valve between your large and small intestine. And this valve, if it's open other than when food is passing through it, then the bacteria of the large intestine and small intestine will pass through that valve and they will die, and that will affect our absorptive system. Now, that valve also will be dependent upon calcium and the right kind of calcium. And then there are other problems we can get. We can get dysbiosis in our gut, meaning the wrong kind of bacteria. So anything that wipes out the right kind of bacteria, and that can be things we're about to talk about, then we can get the wrong bacteria. We can get candida or yeast growing in our gut. Major source of that, taking antibiotics, chlorine in water, eating sugar, having allergenic foods, having inflammatory foods. So how do these differ? Well, allergy, if you test for and run several $1,000s worth of tests, you can determine what you're allergic to in some degree. But things that don't show up on those can be inflammatory, and they can wipe out your mucosal layer and your gut bacteria. You can have a leaky gut. Leaky gut, what we call gap junctions or that filter, if we have any of the above conditions, then those filter can get larger and they will absorb things we shouldn't absorb. And then this becomes a problem. On the opposite side of our gut from where we're absorbing is what we have a very large part of our immune system, something called GALT, gut-associated lymph tissue. Lymph tissue is immune tissue. And if we start absorbing things before they're broken down properly, then our immune system is going to go after them. So this isn't a true allergy, but it's a reaction of your immune system because of a problem in your gut. If we don't have enough digestive fluids. Now let's go back and talk about hydrochloric acid for a moment here. Now, as we talked about, having proper amount closes the valve at the bottom of your esophagus. If you don't have enough, the valve doesn't close. And then what acid you do have washes up into your esophagus and you get heartburn or reflux. And most people, upwards of 99.9% of people who have reflux, the problem is low digestive fluids, not too much. Because on a good day, we make 2 quarts of this stuff. If we have a lack of digestive enzymes, either manufactured in our pancreas or our small intestine, or not present in our food. And here comes the problem with our food, is that when we cook food, the heat from the cooking process destroys the enzymes in the food at approximately 116 degrees. So if we're cooking food or eating food that's been cooked, we should take a digestive enzyme to optimize the breakdown of our food. Now, the first four factors are what you eat, the balance of your hormones, the functioning of your liver, the breakdown and absorption of foods. Now, the ileocecal valve we talked about roughly, and that's part of your digestion and absorption, and we talked about the right kind of calcium. Well, calcium keeps that valve closed unless food is passing through it. And if you are taking calcium, say, and you think you're getting it from milk, you're not. In order to absorb calcium from milk, you have to have a very acidic environment in your stomach. And milk is a very neutralizing pH. As you drink milk, it neutralizes your stomach so you cannot absorb the calcium in the milk. And then milk is high in protein, so you absorb that protein, but that creates an acidic condition in the body. And the body will rigidly control acidity, so you actually use up calcium to buffer that acidity. So when you drink milk, you actually lose calcium. Now, yogurt and the fermented milk products, yogurt, kefir, cottage cheese, and some of the other cheeses are much more absorbable in their calcium. So that becomes a better way to do dairy products. Then also, if you take a dietary supplement of calcium, you want to make sure the form of calcium you take is rotated every 3 to 6 months, because if you continually take the same form, your body will become resistant to it and not absorb it. Or take a calcium has many different forms available. So what I mean by different forms, there is calcium that is calcium from coral. There is calcium citrate. There's calcium malate. So those are the types of forms we're talking about. Now, factor number 5 is what we call emotional eating. You're having a bad day. You don't feel like cooking. Easy to reach for, chocolate bar. Oh, that sounds good. Or your hormones aren't balanced. And then, don't feel like cooking? Really easy. Order a pizza. Ooh, that looks good too. And then sometimes we get those salt cravings, especially if our adrenal glands are not functioning well. Just gotta reach for that French fry. Now, another thing to be said here, as we have nutritionally deplete foods, such as what we call the type 1 foods, the refined carbohydrates, then our body is going to change our hormones such that we crave more calories, and we will reach for these kinds of foods. So just by eating nutritionally complete foods, and we're going to be talking about those very shortly, then we lose the cravings for many of these kinds of foods. And then we have another scenario that begins early in childhood. Most of us as children, and even our children at a young age, are not very good eaters. So we have to bribe our kids to eat. So what do? We tell our kids, eat everything on your plate, then you can have dessert. Something sweet at that point. Or a type 1 food. So really to translate that, what we've just said to our children is overeat, and then you can poison yourself with sugar and set up a lifelong pattern of thinking sugar as a reward. Now this is the emotions of eating, and a lot of this gets stored in our subconscious. And there are various ways to help our subconscious clear from these cravings or desires. And one of the methods I like is what's called emotional freedom technique from Gary Craig. And emofree.com, there's a tremendous amount of information as to how to do that and do it for yourself. And there are various books written on the technique as well. So it's a very good way not only to clear your emotional eating patterns, but a lot of your other subconscious emotional patterns that you're not happy with. All right, so we've talked about the 5 factors. What you eat, not the calories you eat. Because as we talked about, calories in makes no difference. Some calories in are stored as fat. The same number of calories as the different type of food are burned as energy. How well your liver is functioning. If your liver can function properly, it knows whether to store a calorie or send a calorie for being burned. Your hormone balance affects your liver, And if once you've stored fat, your hormones determine if you can utilize that fat. How well you are digesting and absorbing. Are you breaking down food? Are you absorbing it? Are there factors that are interfering with that, or interfering with your hormones, or your liver, and your emotional balance? So the 5 factors, all important. Now, let's talk about food. And what we originally had in the mid-80s was the Food Guide Pyramid, which gave our first category as grains and told us to eat 11 of those a day. And then vegetables, it considered a French fry a vegetable. Well, that failed because number 1, it was the wrong advice. Number 2, it told you a number of servings to eat and didn't define a serving size. Then we had a new Food Guide Pyramid in the late 90s. This was a pyramid with vertical bars on it and a staircase on the left, with no words at all. And it came with an 89-page user's guide, which nobody read. Well, here we're going to present a pyramid, and then we'll talk about how to get the information to see number of servings and how big a serving is. And here's where we're going to talk about what constitutes a healthy food versus a non-healthy food. Category number 1, more than anything else in your life, should be drinking water. Clean, pure water. Now, if your city fluoridates water, then you have to filter that out. And most filters do not remove fluoride. And incidentally, fluoride has never been proven to reduce cavities. And if you look at the literature, you will find that out. So filter your water from fluoride, and there's 3 ways to do that. You can get a reverse osmosis filter. I don't really like those because to make reverse osmosis water, you waste a lot of water in the process in making the good water. You can distill your water, and that will remove everything and give you dead water that actually dehydrates you. Or you can buy something called a KDF filter. Now, the KDF filters that you can find online, or if you live in a bigger city, you can probably find it in some stores, remove everything we want to remove from water: heavy metals, chemicals, fluoride, copper, but it leaves in minerals. And then they're also the lowest cost of producing water, so they're economical. Then, as we're looking at food, what we want to see is where are we getting the most nutrients per calorie? Far and away, the greatest food for that is the dark leafy greens. Swiss chard, mustard greens, dandelion greens, kale, spinach. Remarkable nutrients, scant calories. Should be the bulk of your diet, and we're going to talk about how to do that easily. The low-starch vegetables, mostly they're the things that grow above the ground as far as vegetables go, with a few exceptions we'll be talking about. And most of these are not going to be terribly important that you have to eat organic, because a lot of these, if they're not growing underground, you have a far less chemical signature in them. Beans are very healthy foods, very rich in protein, very filling, and basically dried beans, not canned beans. Canned beans are loaded with salt. Dried beans are just purely healthy for you and cooking them yourself. And if you're not familiar with cooking beans, and if you don't already own one, a pressure cooker is a very effective and fast way to cook a bean. But right on top of the stove is fine if that's what you have. Fruits become important also. Fruits, through really what we call the coloring in the fruits, have so many health benefits. And now we'll talk a word about the sugar that is in fruit, that is fructose. Now, we mentioned earlier that high fructose corn syrup is what you should not be eating, yet there's fructose in fruit. So let's distinguish between what is in fruit and what is in pop and things like that. Now, there's a commercial perhaps you've seen on TV where there's 2 young boys, and the older brother says to the younger brother, "Pass the cereal." And the younger brother says, "Don't eat that, it contains high fructose corn syrup, it's not good for you." And the older brother says, "Why not?" And the younger brother goes silent. And then later on the ad announcer says, Your body cannot distinguish between corn sugar and cane sugar. And that's kind of tells us that cane sugar is healthy? Well, no, that's not true either. But truthfully, high fructose corn syrup and cane sugar are different. In the processing of high fructose corn syrup, we have a problem, and also in how it works in the body. So if I had been the younger brother at that table, here's how I would have answered that question about high fructose corn syrup. Big brother, when you eat that, first problem is high fructose corn syrup is manufactured using caustic soda, and 30% of that stuff contains mercury. So there's a decent chance you've got mercury in your high fructose corn syrup. Secondly, high fructose corn syrup has a higher ratio of fructose to sucrose than does any other sugar. And when you eat that kind of fructose that's been refined into fructose, then that prevents your liver from storing calories, and then you from storing calories in your liver, so then you preferentially package them and store them as fat. And then as you continue to consume the high fructose corn syrup, your sugar levels begin to build up, and now you can't even store it as fat or anything else. So now my blood sugar is going to rise from eating that cereal and drinking that pop. And then as the blood sugar rises, my body is going to become insensitive to insulin. And now I'm heading for diabetes. And then once I have that, I've got to stick needles in myself 5 times a day to see what my blood sugar is. And then I really have to control my diet. And as the diabetes continues, the blood sugar is going to clog up the arteries in my eyes and I could go blind. It could clog up the arteries in my heart and I can have a heart attack. It can clog up the arteries in my legs and make me have to have them cut off later in life. So this is why this is not good for you, big brother. Would you like me to pass the milk along with that? So here's where high fructose corn syrup becomes bad, but the fructose in fruit has got all the minerals and nutrients to utilize it in your body. Nuts and seeds become very healthy, very good sources of protein, but ideally raw. When you roast a nut, the heat from the roasting process rancidifies the oils that are beneficial in the nut, but even a roasted nut still has good protein, but the rancid oils can then do oxidative damage in the body. And oxidative damage is the process that turns iron into rust. It's also the process that turns us into rust. So the healthy fats and oils, things like cold water fish oils, nuts and seeds that are not roasted, those are what we call the essential fats, the ones that get inside your cells and determine what else gets into your cells. And the other thing, though, is if you eat cold water fish and you cook it, same problem with roasting a nut. The heat rancidifies the oil, and then rather than being healthy for you, it creates oxidative damage. Now, the next category we look at are the starchy vegetables. These are the things that grow underground or act like they grow underground. Now, the colored ones, healthier than the white ones, but we want to have less of these in our diet. Dairy products, as we talked about earlier, we like the dairy products that are fermented. The yogurts that are not loaded with sugar or other sweeteners or even artificial sweeteners, so plain yogurt. Cottage cheese. And kefir is a fermented milk product that you can make yourself or you can buy, but you can buy the starters for this and make your own. Then we have the concentrated or dense proteins. Now these are the animal proteins, chicken, fish, beef. And now we have to talk a little bit about the term organic when it comes to these foods. When you are seeing a label for organic beef or chicken, what you are seeing is perhaps not what you want to be eating. To call it an organic chicken, it has to eat organic. Well, that very well means that either the chicken or the cow is in a factory, in a very small cage, and fed organic corn. Now, this is not the food these animals are designed to eat. So if you're looking for beef, look for pasture-raised beef. If you're looking for chicken, free-range chicken. if you're looking for fish, ideally fish you caught yourself. Farmed fish are heavily dosed in antibiotics and synthetic antioxidants to change the color of the flesh. Otherwise, the food they eat, you wouldn't eat the stuff. And then ocean caught fish, there's a very good chance that the fishing methods are depleting the fish supplies. So catching your own fish is really the way to go when it comes to fish. But otherwise, moderate amounts of ocean fish, and probably best to stay away from farmed fish. And the top of the pyramid, the smallest amount of foods we should be consuming are the grains. Now grains, we're not talking about eliminating, but we're talking about whole grains. Brown rice rather than white. Amaranth, quinoa. And quinoa, if you're not familiar with it, it's spelled Quinoa. And it's not actually a grain, it's a seed, but it's used like a grain. And it cooks in about 15 minutes, and it's a complete protein all by itself. So a really nice food if you want to incorporate that into your diet. So now what are the foods you should eat? Again, my name is Mark Harris. I'm a doctor of naturopathic medicine in practice in Bozeman, Montana. Now, this was presented locally, so you don't see an area code. So the area code for my office is 406, then 586-1997. And then on my website, www.dr-harris.com, there's a section labeled Videos and Downloads. In the Downloads section, there is a 2-page document talking about all the foods we just talked about, how many of them to eat, how big a serving size is, and a way that's easy to get dark leafy greens into your diet. Now, what you can control in your diet largely is what you eat. And really, just by choosing well, it's going to take care of a lot of the hormone factors and the liver factors that can otherwise go wrong. But what you can't control are chemicals in your environment, heavy metals in your environment. You can't control aging, but you can age well if you kind of get all this balanced. So some of these factors, you won't know if you have them. So I'm available, of course, if you live somewhere near Bozeman, Montana, but if you don't, we can do a telephone consultation. Or if you have questions, you can feel free to email me through my website, again, www.dr-harris.com. You can email me questions. There's a section that says Contact Us. And again, the phone number, 406-586-1997. Well, I truly hope you've got information now that you can utilize to achieve and maintain your ideal weight and your ideal health. So if I can be of any service in that, please contact me.